Hello, I'm Jacqueline Holstead, and you are listening to On Point Conversations. In this podcast series, we share creative marketing, content, and branding strategies that help your business successfully navigate the new normal marketing environment. Today in my podcast, I'm going to be talking about meetings. It seems like a pretty basic topic, but again, this week I was reminded that more times than I can count, I listen to individuals complain about spending time in meetings. And I get it, because sometimes meetings seem to never close. They don't end, and when they do end, they don't end with any specific plan in place, so there's a lot of confusion. Who's working on what? So the next time that there's a meeting, it might be said, well, so-and-so, you told me you were going to work on something, and they're confused because they thought that you were going to provide something first before they'd work on this. In other words, you can see that there's a lack of communication, and then it creates some frustration and turmoil, and also impacts the timeline and the budget on a project. So to avoid this complaint and make your meetings more productive, one of the things that I very much recommend is starting with an agenda. And not just a really, really general agenda. And again, don't go over the side of being too much, but outlining specifically what you're going to talk about and certain steps and things that are related to that. If it's a project and you can break the project out by certain points in the project, you can start that way by giving people a broad topic, but not too broad so that it gets lost in the weeds and in the translation. The level of detail in your action plan that's going to come from your meeting is really based on a number of things. It depends on how complex the project or the situation is that you're trying to work on for this meeting. So as you set your agenda, and I really think once you write out your agenda, you come to a little clearer understanding of what you need to be talking about. So maybe if you're working on a large project, that agenda starts with the basic things that you're going to get done before the next meeting, and setting it up that way. Because in a team, you can do a lot of things on email or text or however your Slack, however your company communicates. But getting together as a team and talking face-to-face, if it's an in-person meeting, or Zoom even face-to-face, helps you to kind of solidify those things and make sure that you're on the right track. There's no miscommunication and things are moving forward. So let's talk today about what you really need as an actionable plan. So an action plan, I think, is very useful to a wide range of individuals and organizations. You don't have to be a small company to have an action plan, or a large company. And it also depends on what you're talking about in that meeting. And it also depends on whether your project is big or small. But let's today kind of take the example of project managers having a specific idea in mind or a specific project, and you have team members. So it really helps when you have a good action plan to identify a clear path to move forward toward your goal. Because everybody in that meeting, and that's the goal anyway, is to working forward to a goal. And it also helps you to confidently organize whatever tasks are going to be associated with that goal, so that you're able to achieve that goal in the time and under the budget that was designed in the beginning. Now, an action plan should really make it easier for you and your team to stay motivated as well, because you're monitoring progress, you're looking at goals, you're allowing people to be successful, because you're allowing it to keep, we're looking at who's responsible for what, they're going to be very aware of it, you're looking at a certain schedule, and if you're collaborating with others, which is often happens in a team, you use it as a point of reference. So you're really held accountable for each of those tasks. And when people are held accountable and it's clear to them what their task is, they're more likely to avoid things like delays. You don't have to troubleshoot errors as much. So it really is a good thing for you to have in your arsenal of things as you're working on your plans. Now, how do you and your team develop an action plan? So lots of times I'll get pushback on this because people will think and clients will think, well, that's going to be so time consuming and so challenging. But it is really worth it to do it at the start of the project instead of waiting until you're too far into it and it's kind of murky at that end, starting with an actionable plan and focusing on it and gaining clarity of what you want to do and where you're going. So while today I can't really write you an action plan because it's going to differ. It's going to differ in terms of your tasks and your timeline. There are some things you could conform to that will help you that I want to talk about today, and that's really 5 steps. So it's not a lot of steps, but there are things that go into each step. And of course, the first thing, and I've mentioned this before, is you want to develop your goals. So in my experience, the best way to create those actionable goals is to do the SMART method of goal setting. Most companies are aware of this. I'm not sure they do it, but they're aware of it. So SMART stands for being specific, being measurable, being attainable, being relevant, and being time-based. So you're creating a goal that then is considered the SMART goal. So let's talk a little bit about each one of those steps. So being specific means is your goal is very clearly defined. For instance, instead of saying that you just, hey, we need to increase sales, you want to talk about maybe increasing sales by 20% or something that is measurable and very specific. Measurable is the next one. So you want to make sure your goal is measured. You can, for instance, if your goal is to generate more sales, you can try to create weekly or monthly sales reports to track your progress. If it's a project, which I'm more involved in, then it's measurable about how you're going to measure the success of the project. And you can do that in stages and steps versus getting to the very end and measuring it. The third part of a SMART goal is attainable. So it's really good to have high goals, but I want to stress you can challenge yourself, but make sure that they're attainable because you want to be able to achieve those goals. You want the desired progress to feel like I have accomplished something and your team's accomplished something. Make sure the goals are relevant. That's step 4. So it needs to be relevant to the abilities you have in the team, the needs, the interests. For example, if you're trying to increase your advertising revenue by 25%, then setting a goal for initiating a workplace safety program doesn't apply. It's not really relevant. So you want to be really relevant to what you're developing and what you're wanting to do. And then time-based. It should be very specific deadlines for reaching your goal. If you're increasing your profit, it might be you want to increase your income by 10% within the next 6 months or 12 months or whatever is relevant and also attainable. Once you've done that, you want to create a list of actions to achieve those goals. Because now what you're going to do in the second step is you're going to create a list of tasks that you need to complete the goals that you just put together. And you're dividing your main goal into smaller objectives because you don't want to have this big thing that people can't put their arms around. So you're breaking it out into steps. And you can make that final goal really a lot less overwhelming and move closer to it if you've got some kind of organized step-by-step process. So again, you want to make sure those actions are attainable and they're related to your goal. So because if a given task is very vague or intimidating, you're going to find pushback for one and frustration. So let's say, example, you want to get a promotion going. You may have to perform a number of tasks to achieve your goal, such as you want to reach a performance benchmark, you're learning a new skill. And even learning a new skill, even though that's one task, it's likely going to be broken out into smaller, well-defined steps. Because clearly describing each task and creating those step-by-step plans is really the way to get to the ultimate goal of getting whatever goals you've defined in step 1 attainable and done, complete. To make your meetings and your actionable plan really relevant, you also want to set a timeline. You don't want this to go on indefinitely. So besides setting a deadline for your main goal, let's say that you're putting together an event, and that event is 6 months out, you also want to establish a time frame for completing each task in the process. So it's really relevant to create a timeline that you can follow. You can maintain consistent progress, and you can see where you're making progress, and you can see where you're falling behind, and you can see where you need to step some things up. So you're going to assess the requirements and consider the amount of time that you need for each one of those tasks. For example, let's say you want to increase your traffic to your website by 100% in 1 year's time, and you're wanting to use social media and search engine optimization. So now what you're going to do is you're going to set a time frame for achieving your desired results for each of those tasks, such as you're going to increase your social media following by 30% in 4 months. And you're going to make your first page of your website really searchable with certain keywords and make sure it's searchable in 6 months. During that time that you've got that timeline going, by the way, you're going to be evaluating and analyzing, are you getting closer to your goal? Are you seeing increases? Because you're going to also be able to massage then at that point some things some changes you need to make to get there. But you have this idea in place and you have a timeline. The fourth and really another ultimate really good thing to have is to designate resources. So if you're managing a really large project, you'll likely be assigning tasks to a number of people. Assign those skills and abilities of your team to determine which are best qualified to perform each task. So you're going to really assess, is the person I'm selecting got the skills and abilities to perform this task? And then you write down who's going to be in charge of that objective and the resources needed to complete the objective or the task, such as what money is going to be needed, what equipment, what personnel. And you're doing this not in a vacuum, by the way. You're doing this in a team too, and this can be in a meeting to be productive and to evaluate your time. Let's say you're managing a marketing campaign and you need to find out who in your staff is going to be strongest in planning, who's going to be strongest in content production, social media, SEO. And then what are those people, when you assign that task, going to need in terms of tools or money or graphic design? What are they going to need to add to their arsenal of what they already know in order to be productive at this particular task? So you're helping that team work together to develop. And you might have overlap, which is great, several people working together, but it's still needed to know who's responsible for what and who is ultimately responsible for that goal, even within that smaller team. And of course, last but certainly not least, is you want it to be monitoring the progress. So your team doesn't necessarily, and in fact it shouldn't, if it's a large project anyway, meet at the beginning of the project and then sometime meet towards the end of the project. You're meeting intervals of time in order to look at where the progress is going, where things are being held up, maybe where more needs are needing to be met. So you're going to describe how you're going to ensure that each task in your action plan is completed on time. Does there need to be internal reporting? Are you planning regular meetings? Because by doing so, you're going to really have a clearer idea of the progress that you're going to make towards your goal. And you're going to specify where and when you need to change maybe a little bit in what you decided in the beginning. Or maybe you're going to have to add some resources. Maybe there's some money that you didn't think about. Because sometimes, in the beginning of a project, especially a large project, there's so much to think about. And there are things that might not, especially if it's a new project and you've not done it before, there's things that come along the way that you hadn't thought of. And you want to figure out, too, how you're progressing towards your goal. So let's say that you've established your plan, you're moving along, you have these regular meetings, and you're seeing that there might be a problem. Maybe there's a person who's having a hard time getting their particular part done. Maybe it's a situation where there's several people working together and they're not working together that well. So these progress meetings, these progress timeframes offer you the ability to evaluate, because the ultimate goal is that you want your project, your event, or whatever you're doing to be successful and not to be a source of a lot of frustration and conflict within that particular team. And I have found that the better the action plan and the more goals and things that you have in place and the more clear, the less you have of those really conflicting times when it's very difficult or blaming game or anything like that. Or if you do have a blame game, you have a very clear idea of how it was supposed to work and you can go back to it. These